Thank you for watching, liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing right now.
As a guest, I think initially, and then eventually as a host on the Screensaver, and it was an absolute thrill to meet someone who had impacted me in so many ways because of his and quite honestly, it's the spirit of Gnomedex, very hometown feely community. I very much felt that way about Woz. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have invited him to come here because I feel that his who he is very much who you are. Everybody has potential. Everybody has, they enjoy technology to the point where they dream about it. They can't live without it. They surround themselves by it. But it's not because it's their job. It's because it's literally their life. It's difficult for me to do Gnomedex because I can't check my email. I'm away from it, so I don't know what's going on. I feel disconnected. But I think that part of the allure of and part of why I really have been excited to have him with us here today, I'm very honored, deeply honored, is because I see that just his enthusiasm for technology, brought Apple to be one of the, obviously still one of the leaders, and still continues to be. I mean, you look around this room, Steve, I don't know if you probably didn't catch this. They started a Gnomedex Mac user group here today. So it sprang up, and it was funny because I was actually talking to a couple of people, and I don't know if they're here right now, from TechSmith, which is a software company. They do kind of screen capture stuff. And there's an individual who writes for Locker Room, Alan Dennis, and he was worried because the company was out of laptops, and he said, well, the only thing that's there is the Mac. He was afraid. He's afraid to come to Gnomedex. And then you look around the room, and I swear, I see more Apple logos than anything else. And it just happens. It just happens. I'm about this close to converting Ponzi to OS 10, and she wants to do it. She doesn't know why. She's not a geek. She doesn't know why. But she says it just looks better. And, hey, look, she dresses me. I swear to God. These socks, she dresses me. She understands that. And her being someone who enjoys technology for what it can do for her and her lifestyle, not necessarily because it has 512 megabytes versus a gigabyte. She doesn't care. She doesn't know. She just wants to know what it can do for her. And I think that is really part of the excitement of having a tech enthusiast here with us, a leader. And I think I don't go as far as saying unwitting leader, but I think that's part of the allure and what makes it such an honor to have Steve with us today. He's got an energy that is always there, and you can hear it anytime you're talking about technology. And that type of enthusiasm, we all get. We all have that one gadget or gizmo that we just freak out about. And we can't wait to tell someone we don't even know in a supermarket. Yeah, you don't want that one, you want this one. It's really cool. And you look, I got this here, and you flip open this little lens thing. We get excited about it. And that's what drives us. And we all have that potential. We all have that potential. We look around and we see people, who do great things. But, part of this whole phenomenon about blogging and personal publishing, everybody can do great things. And I think that the biggest success story that I can think of a technologist who succeeded with making a passion, just, a life, it's Steve Wozniak. So, the bag, why do I have Sesame Street characters? Because we didn't have Sesame Street for geeks growing up, You couldn't turn on the TV. The closest thing we didn't have, up until recently, was Tech TV. It was the closest thing we had. And we knew about these things that were happening. If you're from across the country, you saw these people, and you heard about these people, what they were doing. It was really cool. But you didn't have your heroes. All the kids have are these puppets and these Muppets. But as geek kids, we have as heroes. People like Steve. And I mean, you may never have touched an Apple in your life, any type of Apple machine. It doesn't matter, because it's all one and the same. It's that passion that drives everybody forward. So we've got this gift bag full of stuff, and I'm not going to. Apparently, Hansi wrapped it with a lot of stuff. In here, essentially, I have I think 3 or 4 different Tetris handhelds, including a Tetris game that you can plug into an AV port. So when you're traveling around and you feel like you need to break a world record, you can have it on you. You can keep it in a different car. So I got 3 or 4 different kinds. So just choose what you like. And I also have in here, and this is no reflection on anything other than it's an Obi-Wan Kenobi figure. And I chose that. Everything has symbolism. I chose that because, as I said, we have very few heroes that we can look up to and respect from a level of being technology enthusiasts. And I'm serious when I say that you're a hero of mine, and I know you're a hero of a lot of people out here. And I want to welcome you, Steve. You're welcome to stay as long as you want. We love you. Come on up here. I'm not sure. Okay, I know how bad this looks. Try that, Steve. Try that. Are you hot?
Yeah, I think so.
Is he hot?
Yeah. Good. How great Tetris, games. I mean, games is a big driving factor in everything I did in technology. And I guess Chris and some people like me because I was just a technologist only, never run a company type person, never a business type guy. And, a lot of us appreciate that. And I got really into the mode of appreciating technologists as the greatest people in the world way back in high school. Well, when it comes to games and Tetris, it's so great that I got these because in 1988, when Tetris came out on the Game Boy, I always had the high score printed in Nintendo Power magazine. And then it got so much, they said, we aren't going to print your name anymore. You've been in too many times. And I thought this was great for a dad to tell his kids, I've been #1 in Nintendo Power magazine. And because the kids can play games. I play very few games, but I play those few with a real focus and intensity. So I set my name and spelled backwards, Evans Kainzow. And the next month I forgot about it, and I opened up the Nintendo Power magazine, there's Evans Kainzow with a high score, and I thought, is that higher or lower than mine? And, oh my God, it's a foreigner. And I said, oh my God, he lives in the next city over, Saratoga. And then I remember doing it. I hope everyone had, you all have your vitamin C this morning, caffeine. Yeah, vitamin S. The digital, we talk the word digital, and I think, oh my gosh, sometimes things lose a little quality when they go to digital. Like it's a way to get things cheaper than they were and come up with cheaper versions. And I think particularly of cell phones. For ages and ages and ages until just this year, I managed to hold on to my analog cell phone because I sounded like Steve Wozniak everywhere I went. And it's kind of important to keep sort of a reality in life. It's good in computers when the speech and the animation looks realistic and not jerky and everything. But then I got this car, a Prius Hybrid, and it works with your cell phone with Bluetooth. And I swear to God, that was the reason I bought the car. It was the reason I switched to a digital phone. And I went through phone after phone after phone after phone that had Bluetooth but wouldn't work in the car, and finally got one that would. And the car amplified it so much it cut off and distorted, and I couldn't hear the syllables, so I turned it off, so it was bad. But I love the car anyway. So, sometimes digital, has some steps backwards. I'm in this hotel, I love it, I love my room, I'm in a great room. I measure rooms when I get there by the number of the room, the digits in the room. If you get a room like 111, it's great, 124, it's binary. So I got 1604, it's real binary. You know those are the good rooms, unless it's a prime number, those are good ones too. Every once in a while you get a lousy one. So, speaking of, digital lifestyle stuff you carry with you, gadgets and all that stuff, I kind of carry my whole world, my whole technology world in one big backpack. It's so well packed, so tight, that it's like heavier than lead. It is so heavy to carry. People lift it up and say, how do you carry that? I put on my back. I go through airports. Well, recently I bought one of those big batteries the size of a sheet of paper, just in case I'm ever in need of a battery for 10 hours. So I stuck it down and just slid it down into my backpack and made room for it. And ever since then, every X-ray security machine in airports triggers on my bag, and they So 3 times they've taken close to half an hour to pull every little thing out of every little zipper pocket. So I'm in Logan Airport yesterday, and they're zipping every pocket. There's so many pockets, they still missed 2 of them. And one of them is full of, chargers and cables and all that. But they opened other slots and pulled out every converter cable, every adapter cable in the world, for monitors and different FireWire connectors and USB and everything. And everything in the world. And they got in one little pocket full of all the batteries, AA's and AAA's and CR2s and some of these. And they pulled out iPods and Game Boys and cameras and spare cell phones and extra batteries and CDs and a bunch of DVD movies and cables and a cam that I carry on the machine. One of my projects for about 6 years. 6 years ago, we could connect to the internet real slowly through modem calls with our cell phones with a little cable. And I had this idea, gosh, what if I went to a concert and put a cam on and just broadcast it? But you can't do it over this was a low analog modem. This was back in the days when you're lucky to get, 4,800 baud going through. So it was kind of hopeless. Well, just this year, I noticed at our local amphitheater, there was a Wi-Fi on backstage, and it was wide open. So we started bringing our computers to my box where we sit, and open up our computers, and we're online during the concert. And that was kind of cool. And then I noticed now they have about 6 of them. All the groups that show up turn on all their Wi-Fis, and most of them are wide open. So it's kind of neat. And then I thought, well, how am I going to set up a live webcam with audio and video really live? Not for public consumption, just for a friend or two, just to say I did it. And so one day I said, get a VPN to your home where you've got real internet addresses. So I'm going to pull that one off real soon. I love number games. I love, matter of fact, instead of crossword puzzles with words, I like to play these things called cross sums, where it's all digits, and the digits have to cross and line up. And you get told the digits across this row, none of them are allowed to be the same, and no zeros have to add up to 22, and the digits going down this one have to add up to 3 or 18 or something. You have to figure it all out. It's like a real complicated logic puzzle, and I love those games everywhere I go now. And you can play them on airplanes when they're taking off because they're not electronic. So one game I was playing recently was coming up with words that start with the letter G. And G is kind of an interesting letter. There's a lot of words that start with G, but I found out in reading another book, it's the start of life. Because the G, the guanine, is the first base of chromosome number 1 of humans. So G is the start of life. The geek's gone wild has 10 G's in it. Well, I had kind of a nice, I'm kind of glad for the time that I grew up. I'm kind of glad that it was before computers, so I got to see a lot of the change. But my childhood was really in a different place. Although it's called Silicon Valley now, it was Santa Clara Valley then. It was just full of orchards and trees and fruit trees everywhere you went. A little housing development, you'd have to go 4 different directions through orchards to get to your schools and all. And luckily, a lot of parents were moving into companies like Lockheed that were building electronics projects. They were hiring engineers. So we wound up in our block having a lot of kids that got interested in electronics. Nowadays, I go around, it's hard to find kids that are interested in electronics, although you can still buy the kits. For kind of at that level of interesting children in building electronics. I still see them in toy stores, so it's not impossible to inspire a few kids that we have. In our neighborhood, we kids would go work doing weeding jobs and all for neighbors, and then to get paid, we'd have them open up their garage and we'd look in their bottles of resistors, bottles of capacitors, bottles of little batteries, and we'd take the ones that looked the neatest to us. Not that we had any use for them, but that was what we'd rather work for than money. And we'd read all the electronics catalogs of different equipment that was out, hi-fi equipment, radio equipment, receivers, walkie-talkies, and every once in a while save up all our lunch money. One time it was 35 cents a day for lunch, and I saved it for a whole year. Finally had about 37 bucks to buy a couple of walkie-talkies, and then they had this sale. This was back in the Cold War days, so they had the sale of emergency kits that could survive your family for 2 weeks. So I entered this little lottery in my junior high school and spent all my money on that. Well, we'd also ride our bikes down to Sunnyvale Electronics. We'd read popular electronics magazines, see some little circuits, and every once in a while, more than just looking at those parts and drooling, you could buy electronics were full of resistors and capacitors, nothing like chips, really. They hadn't been invented yet. And we just drool over that, and at one point we got to where we wired down the entire block on the fence. We'd go on the fence and staple the wire on, And then every once in a while, it'd stop working, we'd find that one of the neighbors cut the wire into 100 pieces. So we'd just run the wire on the other side of the fence where they couldn't get to it. And then we'd buy buzzers and microphones and all that stuff and batteries and hook up our little intercom system throughout the neighborhood. And we would read Tom Swift Jr. books. Most of the kids in school read, girls would read Nancy Drew, and the boys would read the Hardy Boys, and we read Tom Swift Jr. because he was this guy that was an engineer, and he owned his own company. And whatever conflicts there were in the world, whatever problems there were that needed solving, he would go out and he would go into his lab and work for a few days with his friend, and they'd design something neat and pull it out, a plasma field to hold an alien, or a rocket ship to go into outer space, or a submarine, or whatever it was. And it was so neat. He owned this company with his father, and what a neat hero. Early, stumbling into electronics, just trying to, getting that inspiration is going to lead you to what you're going to be in life. Started out, with simple projects like crystal radios. Built a little crystal radio. Didn't really understand it, but somehow it heard in one station. I think if you just hooked a wire up to anything, you'd hear that in one station. It's super powerful in their body. Well, it wasn't KGO. I was actually in Southern California that year for the first few years. And you don't necessarily learn a lot from your first project when you're too young. And it's kind of like you have to learn atoms before you can learn molecules. And if you haven't really learned the atoms, building a project, you don't necessarily learn from it. You have to go in stages. Cognitive development is the way the mind develops. Well, I remember when I was living up here in Silicon Valley, about 8 years old. For a Christmas present, I got one of these big multi-switch things that had switches and dials and wires you could flip on and connect things to different lights and buzzers. And you'd wire up all these projects, and it was like logic. If you have this switch that way and this other one here and push a button, the buzzer goes. And it's like logic, all these things working together. So it was a really great project to learn from. And of course, it was a Christmas gift. So I snuck down after my parents were asleep. I pulled one present at a time into my room and carefully opened them up, saw what they were, and closed them and put them back up. And I think when it came time to Christmas, we got into this guessing game. I wonder what it is. And my parents obviously must have figured me out because I guessed them all. But this sort of project is the start of a logical thinking, just your first little switches and lights, a little more complicated than the flashlight you might build for a fourth grade science fair project. Well, in fifth grade, my father, who was really well educated, got me started on learning about atoms and chemistry. So I had an element collection, and for my science fair project, built this huge display, a round spherical thing with 92 different lights for the different electron orbits that the 92 elements could have. And then it had 92 switches. And you flip on a switch for a certain element, and the right electron lights glow. And it was a little bit tricky because if you turn on one light, one electron, one button, one electron lights. Turn on the next switch, two electrons light. The next one, three light. And it was really a trick of using diodes. Figuring out that a diode can let current go one direction, but not back the other way. And so each switch could just add a diode and some electrons. Except then you get up to a certain point in the periodic table, and all of a sudden the electrons that were on go off, and they change to different ones. And there's a hopping around sequence. And that got into some more complicated diodes and that kind of logic. Well, this is just a great little simple step. It's a mechanical project almost, but it's playing around with a very simple low level, not trying to learn everything in one day. And my teachers started to notice that I was doing these projects that were kind of large, kind of beyond stuff you'd find in fifth grade, kind of electronic. So they started talking to me and said, oh, he's the whiz in the whole class. He's the straightest student in the class because he's smart in science and math. People are always afraid. Those guys who are smart in science and math are like the sharpest students are. So my teacher made me feel proud of myself in schooling and all that. In fifth grade, I read a book called SOS at Midnight. A ham radio operator was the hero. And at the end of the book, it had a very interesting page that said, you can become a ham radio operator at any age. You can't drive a car when you're 10 years old, but you can be a ham radio operator. So anyway, I got all the documents, I got into class, I learned what I need to learn the Morse code, and got a ham radio license by 6th grade. One of the big benefits of that was everything back then, you didn't just buy it and learn how to use it. Every ham radio you bought was a big kit where you had to bolt the pieces together according to a manual and put in resistors and capacitors and diodes and tubes one at a time and solder all the wires together. And it took weeks to build. It was a very large project. So it was real good in 6th grade to get used to such a huge job. I mean, it wasn't quite as complicated as building a whole car, but you know, to a sixth grader, it was kind of on that level. And yet also to get him radio license, you had to learn some calculations that had to do with circuits. You had to learn Ohm's law and a few more, and how to calculate some frequencies and even capacitors and tube amplification and all that stuff. So it was a really good electronic step. And then in sixth grade, about the time I got my ham radio license, I got my first transistor radio. And it was like a product that influenced my thinking about how products should be for the rest of my life. It was one nice little device that did something extremely useful for me. It was reliable and easy to use. It did just what it was supposed to. And it was portable. And it ran on batteries. And it would run for weeks. And I could sleep by it and leave it on all night long and listen to it. And that little radio, just, you know, to this day, I think is the sort of product that I like to see. I mean, how many products do we have nowadays that are small, portable, convenient, you know, stable, reliable, and simple? Sometimes it's a formula that gets forgotten. And there are different cultures in the world that really treat our electronic products of today differently. Some build the product around the human, and some build the product to be a piece of technology to be admired. When I was in about the same time, sixth grade, I discovered a journal that was never sent out to people. People never would expect to see a computer in their life. Computers were these big, huge things that filled up rooms, and they were in very huge companies, and they were in the military, and who knew what computers really were. They were almost as dangerous as the atomic bomb. So you'd never see one. But I found a journal in a closet in our house, and it was for engineers like my father. And it had a bunch of articles about computers. Some of the old computers that had tubes and filled rooms. It had one article about a tube that was basically a cathode ray tube, like a television tube, and the dots that lit up were the memory. And they could read the memory and then refresh the dots and keep them on or off. And how amazing to read these kind of articles. They made sense to a fifth grader, even though a normal person could never buy this sort of journal. It was only for very specialized engineers, but it wasn't beyond the learning level of a fifth grader. Read other articles in there. Read an article on Boolean algebra, how you could convert ands into ors and knots and whatever. And it was so interesting to learn this type of algebra. It was a lot easier than algebra in school. And it's like you didn't need higher level math. You didn't have to go all the way through high school and college and calculus and and everything else just to learn Boolean algebra, the logic of computers, the mathematics of computers. And Boolean algebra was based around gates. A simple gate it's the basic building block of all of our hardware. And two inputs come in, and if they're both on A and B, the output is on C. That's called an AND gate. And an OR gate is if A is on or B is on, the output is on. So learn about gates, and it was such a simple concept. My dad sat down on a blackboard. He was an engineer, and he taught me how electrons would flow. Of course, I knew electrons very well from my early project the prior year, building elements. And how they would flow through a transistor and cause other electrons to flow through a transistor and amplify and invert and all that stuff. So I started learning the circuitry that would build gates at the same time. And none of this stuff involved higher level mathematics. So it was just fine even in sixth grade. I was stumbling into all this great learning that was on the right path by actual plan. And of course, it was going to become very important to me even by the end of sixth grade. In sixth grade, I decided to build a product that's logical. I'll put on a whole bunch of gates on a big, huge piece of wood, pound nails in for terminals, solder transistors and diodes and resistors to all the terminals, and build one logic gate after another, after another, after another that does a job. And the job I chose was a tic-tac-toe playing computer. Because tic-tac-toe is logic, right? Does everyone agree that you cannot lose a tic-tac-toe? Okay, just wanted to set you up. And if you play if you have a strategy, if you know that there's an X in this corner and an X there, where are you going to put your O? In between them. That's logic. Here and here, the output is in between. So a whole bunch of logic gates can figure out, based upon which squares are taken by a human, which one the computer should respond with. And it wasn't until very much later in life, like now, that tic-tac-toe is not a game of logic. Tic-tac-toe is a game of psychology. And almost everybody says, well, you can't lose a tic-tac-toe. So I'll sit down and play tic-tac-toe with them and beat them. And it turns out that there's a psychological approach that will trick them into making mistakes when they think they're making the right moves. So I'll hold back on that because I can't show it here. Anyway, this tic-tac-toe computer was great. And my dad, influenced me that teaching was really important. My teacher liked me so much and made me feel that I was a good student. And he taught me that, the teachers are really the future. They're going to build a younger generation to go out and make the world a lot better than the older generation had ever made it. And I said, wow, when I grow up, I'm going to be an engineer like you, but the second I want to be a teacher, like my teacher. And I said, teachers make more than engineers, don't they? And he didn't inspire me that much. No. I said, well, elementary teachers make the most, right? No. In 7th and 8th grade, I was kind of like, that's when kids start socializing. I was kind of left out of that socialization. And I was very, very shy, sat in the back and didn't talk to people much. And sometimes when you're that way, a lot of your energy to socialize and have interaction with people comes out secretly, the secret interactions. Either opening lockers or playing pranks of various sorts. So I played a lot of pranks. I got caught for a lot of them, sent home in 7th and 8th grade. I loved the time the principal called me into his office and laid these things on his desk and said, we opened your locker and we found these pin shooters. There was this guy that was claiming he was going to make a pin shooter that had a firecracker that was going to launch a pin. And I said, those aren't pin shooters, those are spitwad shooters. It's not a pin then. So anyway, I got sent home enough times, I kind of learned whatever you do, be so secret, nobody ever else knows about it. And I became, in this shy period, I became very independent about my study. Go into a little room in my house and just read the books and learn and do homework. And I really didn't interact a lot with teachers or other students, just the wave that I followed. So my group of people was generally the electronics friends on my block, the ones that I grew up with. And I was kind of a leader of in that electronics field. So I would always kind of choose a group where I was the leader, even though they were sometimes a little bit younger, but I would choose where we're going to ride our bikes today. And even though I was kind of shy out of it, I was very smart. Got the math award from my junior high school and went on to high school knowing how not to get caught at things. In 8th grade, I built another logic project. And I built this one on a smaller board. It had been designed for little pins that you could solder to. I built it very tightly. Transistors, diodes, resistors. I had to solve a few problems that I used resistors for an OR gauge and used diodes. And got it all working to where I built up a logic gate. I went back to the journal that I found a couple years before. And it had all the logic gates that made an adder. And I studied it and figured out what they did, how they made their decisions. And an adder takes a binary bit in, and another binary bit in, adds it, comes up with a binary bit to carry. And then you string 10 of these adders together, you've got a 10-bit adder which can count up to, add numbers up to 1024. So I decided to build this project, but they also had a schematic in the same journal of a subtractor. I started looking at these, and the gates were almost the same for a subtractor and an adder, really different. So then I worked out my own logic. This was probably the first thing I really kind of invented on my own. My own logic for a couple of gates that if I threw a switch, it would be add or subtract, both ways. And then I built this little 10-minute project for the science fair in 8th grade, won all these fantastic awards, even won an award for the electronics project of the Bay Area Science Fair. Went right up to 12th grade, and I was only in 8th grade. Got my first airplane ride as a result of that. So I was on the right step to learning more about computers. I wanted to know what a computer was, but I didn't really know. I knew that computers did calculations. Well, now I know how to build something that added numbers. I knew that couldn't be a whole computer. But I went to the science fair and I saw another project, and I learned something very important about step sequence programs, that basically a computer does one thing after another. This project had a stepping motor. The stepping motor would go click, 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 down about 15 levels, and at each level you could dial in an instruction. So it would go click, 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 click through a few instructions, and one instruction might be a branch, and the stepping motor goes back up to the top. So even though it was mechanical, not electronic, it was so easy to look at it, and I was so emotionally taken by realizing this is how computers work. They do one step after another, and they repeat themselves. And when you learn something emotionally, you learn it a lot deeper sometimes, and it becomes like a whole part of your brain that gets set aside to remember those little steps and store them. A lot more than if you had learned it just in a book in school for a grade. In high school, my electronics took me into, one time I wanted to have fun with a friend, because I was like that little prank, just people didn't know electronics. And so I built an electronic metronome and put it in his locker. So it's ticking away. The fact that I grabbed some C-cell, canisters and took off the wrapping and made these big metal canisters that said contact explosive. But you could hardly hear it in the C building, and I said, oh, what a wasted prank, and I went to my final. And later on in the day, somebody said, the vice principal wants to see you. So I went by the locker and opened up my friend's locker, and and the metronome was gone. Oh man, so that was the one time I got caught in high school. I went in, they told me, your buddy told us everything. They just, the guy's locker was in, who'd done it. So they had the cops, they had the dean, they had my counselor, they had the principal, they had the vice principal, other people. And I'm sitting there and the principal tells me how he opened the locker. And he grabbed this thing to his chest and he ran out to the football field and dismantled it. I had this visual image of it, and I couldn't hold back my laughter because I had it rigged so when you opened the locker, it started ticking faster. Mr. Bryan. Well, our high school I was very, very lucky. I had a lot of lucky things happen. Had a very good electronics program, better than any of the community colleges nearby. More equipment, better equipment, and an incredible teacher. And his teacher wrote his own studies. He wrote his own handouts for the class, his own class notes, and he designed it to go in a very step-by-step procedure. Learn one bit of electronics, then take it to another step higher, then another step higher, another step higher. He had a very good sequence in his course, and it was all based upon the equipment that we had to use. It was Steve kids and students had assembled in early days. At some point, he realized that I knew all the electronics, and all I was going to do was play pranks and wire people's radios up with the tube filaments going to AC. So he did something that is really good for a teacher. If you can find, some outstanding students that, usually what we have is a bunch of students in a school, and a teacher will say, the education is what we provide here. That's the education you get. Go find more on your own. He found an engineer on an outside company in Sylvania that would let me come down once a week and program a computer. What the heck is a computer? I found out I could buy at some college or something a Fortran programming book. And then I went down to this company and they showed me where the computer was and how you type out cards and how you, unfortunately I was a good typist, and how you run the cards into this computer and you watch the lights blink and the printer starts printing and it comes out. So I tried a couple of programs and then this was so great an opportunity. It was the biggest thing in my life. So one of my first big programs I wrote was called the Knight's Gambit, where the knight chess piece tries to jump around and get every square on the chessboard exactly once with knight moves and no duplications. And it's hard to figure out. So I said, oh my God, I have a computer for the first time in my life that does 1,000,000 things a second. A normal human being can only do about one thing a second. This computer's doing 1,000,000 a second. I wrote my program and the lights just flickered and they blinked and they flickered and they blinked and nothing came out. So the next week I came back and I wrote the program so I could print out the chessboards it was working on. And I started studying my printouts and I saw that the program was working exactly the way it had been intended to, but that it was going to take 10 to the 25th years to solve. And I think that lesson stuck with me that, that you can go for, brute force, but you can never beat a human mind coming up with a clever approach to solving most problems. While I was down at that company, I saw a book called The Small Computer Handbook. My God, I didn't know they ever had manuals on computers. The computers could reach people, and you could read about them. And they let me take this small computer handbook home that described the PDP-8. And I now had two things in my life. I had a manual that described a computer architecture, the registers, the instructions, what they did, how they worked, how much memory, how it addressed memory. And I had my knowledge of how to put chips together, gates together. Chips sort of had just started coming out. When I was very young, in 6th grade, my father was working on missiles for Lockheed. We had to make things very small and light. He was showing me packing instructions, how to get transistors packed in the tiniest space. And he said they're going to invent chips. They're just about to come out with chips that will have more than one transistor on. And I actually got to go to a show in San Francisco, Westmont show, and see the first people that had the first photograph, the first 6-transistor chip that Fairchild was ever going to make. And it was kind of amazing. But now I knew chips, and I knew logic gates, and I knew how to design them into things. And I said, I wonder if I can design this PDP-8 computer out of my knowledge of logic gates. I had to figure out some understandings of timing and registers and delays, and so everything doesn't happen at once. It happens step by step by step. And I started designing it. It took many pages, maybe 10 pages of designs to be part of this computer. But it was a learning step. It was my first try. And over time, I would design that computer every few weekends. I would sit down and try to design it again. And the chip industry was growing up. This was the start of Silicon Valley. They were coming up with new chips. Next week they might have a chip that has 2 gates on it, or a chip that has 4 gates, or a chip that has an adder. Now, you couldn't buy these chips. There was no place to buy them. There was no way for a human to buy them. And a chip with 1 gate might cost $50 back then. I mean, that was 1960 some dollars, so that's like $500 for a gate today. I mean, we couldn't have an industry if we had that. But I could see them on paper, so all my designs were theoretical on paper, and I enjoyed doing it. It's kind of like a fun game, and the game became compete with yourself. How much better can you do than you did the last time you tried to design a computer? I found out there were a lot of other mini computers coming out around 1970. And I would go down with my friend Alan Down, we'd drive down to Stanford Linear Accelerator Center. We chose Stanford Linear Accelerator Center because a lot of smart people work there. And where we find really, really bright people working, they leave doors open. So we would drive in on a Sunday, and we'd start going upstairs and trying doors, and we'd find an unlocked door. And we'd go into the main building, and we'd find the library. And in the library, they had computer magazines, and I would read every article I could. And then at the end, they'd have cards that we could send in to Hewlett Packard, to Varian, to Digital Equipment, to Data Journal, to all these companies that were coming out with mini computers, and they would send you their manuals. So I started getting more manuals of computers and better chips every few months, and I started designing every mini computer that had ever been built, and just practicing it for the heck. And like I said, there's no end goal. It's just trying to beat yourself. I measured my designs by how few chips they could be. So I became kind of a purist, trying to do better than any other human, trying to come up with tricks of logic gates and keeping track in my head that I've got 5 OR gates used, but you only get 4 on a chip. Maybe I can convert one to an AND gate and do this a different way and change this to an inverted output. All these different ideas, you store numbers in just an inverted form because when they come out, it saves you 1 chip. And that became a real goal in my life. I finally got a manual for a computer got introduced called the Data General Nova. And the Nova, all the other computers before it had about 50 instructions to do arithmetic things. 50 different instructions that the computer knew how to do. This Nova had 1 instruction, spread out over 16 bits. And 2 of the bits specified 1 of 4 registers for a source. 2 bits specified another register for the other source. And 3 bits said whether you're going to add or, exclusive or, and, invert, different operations you're going to perform on it. And then a few more bits decided whether you're going to have a carry set, and a shift at the end. And I said, this is so strange. There's a couple instructions that you just can't do that other computers have. But then it does some interesting things. So I didn't know how it was going to turn out. Finally, I got a weekend free, and I sat down with chips, and I started designing this Nova computer. And I discovered that my instruction register had 2 little wires going to this multiplexer, 2 going to that multiplexer, 3 going to this multi-adder type chip, and 1 going to a carry-in. And the wires, I didn't have to build logic in for all the things it could do. I wound up using half the chips of all my other designs, and the computer was just as good. And that one really stunned me the most. And it said, when you design stuff, you should try to design it. If you think it out ahead of time, if you spend a little extra time knowing what parts you're working with and try to design an architecture around those parts, you can do a much better job. But we aren't allowed to do that in today's industry, because you go to today's industry and everything's well managed, and you have to define what the project's going to be and do and how you're going to do it. Also, your line code is defined before you write the code. But this is sort of like when you get things down to a one-man level, they can kind of invent and decide on the fly how things work out efficiently and how the subroutines might have been a little different than the ones I chose, and the routines, the functions might have been different, and I could have gotten away with a lot less code. Well, I became a very big fan of efficiency, output over input. And I always like to tell people as I grew up designing stuff that I was lazy. If I design something with very few parts, I don't have to spend as long wiring. And I'm just too lazy to wire it extra hours. So it's kind of like a student in a school, always trying to do something a little bit extra, always trying to do something a little bit better than almost any other person would think of doing. Finish a project and think of something to add that's a little better than someone else. So I grew up with that kind of excellence. I told my dad, someday I'm going to own a 4K Nova computer. That was the minimum you needed to run Fortran. Of course, you needed some other expensive things like teletypes. My dad said, well, it'll cost more than a house. And I said, I'll live in an apartment. I'm going to have a computer that can run Fortran someday in my life. This is near the end of high school, early first year of college, and I was walking, thinking things out, and I decided that, there's a lot of difference between people who are objective in mathematics and in logic design and computers. Everything's objective. There's usually a calculation and one answer. Even in science, pretty much everybody gets the same answer. But in English and history, everybody would have subjective answers, and the teacher could judge it based on how they liked the student or what they read in that wasn't even there. So I kind of became a real fan of technical people being the closest to honesty there was, and that anybody, they were the best people. I went off to my first year at college, and although I had 800s and all the math and science SATs, I only applied to one school, and it really came from my heart. I went out to visit the University of Colorado in snow. First time in my life I'd ever been in snow, so I went to that school. And I got my first computer class. In 1968, there were almost no undergraduate computer curriculum. So even though I was a freshman, because I was in engineering, I was allowed to take these graduate courses in computers. And I took my first computer class, and I got an A+ in it. And I ran every program I could think of in the world, including programs with calculated numbers. So I would run 7 programs on punch cards 3 times a day, each one printing out 60 pages, punching out the cards to do the next 60 pages the next time, and the next 60 pages. Piling up reams of output in my dorm room. And then I got put on probation for computer abuse. And they threatened to make me pay more than tuition, expensive tuition too, for this use. I was so scared I didn't want to go back to that school and risk my parents finding me out. So they really scared me off. But while I was there, I went down to Radio Shack and bought their highest frequency transistor and just put it into a little tiny circuit with a very few parts and a little 9-volt battery that would basically broadcast a weak signal that we could twist a little capacitor out of an AM radio, twist it, and it would fuzz up TV channels on a color TV. It would black out a black and white. So in my dorm, they knew I had this, so I couldn't get away with too much. So I went over to the one dorm that had a color TV for people to watch on campus. And it was a girls' dorm, Libby Hall. We'd go down to the basement, and down there I sat in the bathroom at night, turned my jammer on, and I fuzzed up a picture of it. And unbeknownst, no planning or anything, one of the guys in the front row who knew that it was me whacked the TV. So I made it go good. And after a while, I would jam it, he would whack it, it would go good. And then I got to the point you'd have to get it harder and harder, and then eventually, once he didn't get up to whack it, somebody else got it and started whacking it. So I had my first scientific subjects in a psychology experiment. Guinea humans, we call it. So I got over the next couple of weeks, they would station one person sitting next to the TV, and whenever it went bad, it was his job to either bang it or go to the fine-tuning that we had in those days, and fine-tune it. And then he'd get perfect, and he'd pull his hand away and go bad again. And they started to discover that your body position mattered for what they did. So one time there were 3 guys on the TV set, 2 in the front, 1 in the back, trying different things, and all of a sudden the picture went good. I spotted a guy had his hand on the middle of the screen. I thought, this is funny. I made it go good. And then they said, okay, it's fixed, everybody relax, and they all pulled back. The hand pulled back and it went bad. And one guy said, hey, get your bodies back where they were. They tried to get the bodies back. Finally, the guy put his hand on the screen and it went good. He pulled his hand off and it went bad. Well, he had a foot sitting up in the air on a chair. He put his foot down on the floor and it went bad. He put his foot up on the chair, and then he turned to the audience and he said, it's a grounding effect. It's a grounding effect. And so they sat and watched the last half of Mission Impossible, half an hour, with a hand. And I should have done this. Got credit for that experiment. Another time they said, let's hold the antenna, and the antenna fixed it. And then they put down its bad. So hold up, and eventually they had to get up higher, get up on a chair. Finally, the guy had to get on his tiptoes for the TV to work. And I took one of those TV jams to my computer class because a few people got to see the professor live, but most of us had to watch 4 TV sets and see it live. And I turned on the jammer, I built it into a little magic marker, a little yellow magic marker, I turned it on, and it jammed some of the sets differently. The set right next to me hardly got jammed at all. Closed circuit, And the one up there, and this one over here was jammed the worst on the right. Well, 3 TAs stood up, and I went into fright. I didn't know we had teachers in this room. I was just going to jam it and then unjam it. And they said, okay, whoever's got the transmitter, get it off. Well, I'm not going to reach down and turn off my magic marker, everybody will get caught. And I'm thinking, how am I going to get away with this? And those guys are watching us like hawks throughout the class. And I said, at the end of class, we all walk out. Nobody will know who had it. Well, near the end of class, this one guy by the TV that was jammed the worst starts gathering his books together to leave early. And he walks out towards the door. So as he's walking towards the door, I make the sets go on and off. And I went out the door, and they were all perfect. One of the TAs pointed like this, and later I heard from a friend right behind him, the TA said, there he goes. And I was so proud of getting 2 for 1. The next year I went to a community college in Neanza College, and a friend of mine from high school duplicated their key to the computer room. We would go in at midnight, over and over and over, and run huge programs on punch cards through that machine. You know, he would turn it all on. He didn't know how to program it. I'd write these programs, and so did quite a bit. You know, I just wanted to do anything I could possibly do on computers. And I took classes that didn't even carry transfer credit to my eventual degree in computers, but they were computer classes where I could play tricks and try to write programs, you know, half as big as the teachers thought it was possible. And the year after that, that's my second year of college, but then I wanted to transfer to Berkeley, but there comes a point in your life you need money. And I got a job programming a computer one summer and decided to stick with the job for a year and earn the money for my third year of college, which I did. And during that year, I was introduced to Steve Jobs by a fellow. I was building a computer of my own design. It had switches and lights, a little board, switches and lights on the front, and it was kind of like all these mini computers, just like an airplane cockpit. If you knew what the switches meant and what the lights meant, you could use it, you know. And I could toggle little programs in and push buttons. I designed it and I got the parts from an executive of our company. Finally got me parts for one of my computer designs. First time in my life, around 1970. And while we were wiring it up in a friend's house, he introduced me to Steve Jobs because we had a couple things in common. Pranks and electronics. So Steve came out and he would talk about his pranks that he would pull tapping phone lines under the tunnels under our high school, and I would talk about my pranks of putting weird sound makers behind TV sets, and the teachers would think the TV was screwed up. And so we hit it off from day one, you know. And we both were kind of philosophical about life. Steve, you know, we're kind of social outsiders coming around with other social outsiders that makes us think a lot. So, you know, the words of Bob Dylan music meant more than the music of Beatles music. To us, and we liked electronics. Steve would work at Hewlett Packard for a while. We'd build frequency counters out of displays, and I would do the same sort of thing. And so we hit it off for quite a while. After that year, I went off to a year of college at Berkeley, and my roommate wound up writing a 9-page paper for English called Fiction, but it was really the truth about everything I'd done that year. It was the biggest prank year of my life, and I don't have time to tell it all, but part of it, of course, was blue boxes, which is well known. Steve and I did blue boxes, you know. And to me, a blue box got you out to the world, like ham radio was a way to reach out distant to people in another state. Now these blue boxes could actually call numbers in other countries. It was like a little bit of a realization of the freedoms of the physical world, of the fences of the physical world. And I had this blue box design, and Steve Jobs said, let's sell it. So we'd sell them in the dorms. We had all these ways to sell them. On the way to doing that, though, there were a lot of blue box stories, and a lot of them had these weird names, these handles. I was Berkeley Blue, there was Groucho. You'd read these articles in the Sunday paper about Captain Crunch was the main guy. You know, you'd read about the blind phone freaks, Joe Ingressia Jr., and Albert Maine, and all these different names. So Captain Crunch was not yet caught by the FBI. He would take his van out to a desert, snake into a payphone cable, and set up networks all across the country, tying these phone freaks together that were smarter than the phone company engineers that were redoing the phone systems at their will. And it was just the most amazing story. He hadn't been caught yet. And Steve and I managed to find out who he was. Got a tip from an old high school friend. We called the radio station. They said he dropped out of sight after the Esquire article. And he called us. And he was going to come and meet us in the dorm. I had been telling stories the whole school year to everybody in my dorm about this guy, Captain Crunch, and the most amazing things he did, and how he was so great at cracking the phone system, but he didn't want to get caught and pretend like he really could do it because the FBI would get him, and he's coming to our dorm. I hear a knock on the door. And I go over, I'm going to meet this suave guy that taps his girlfriend's phone lines. I open up the door. Here's this disheveled looking homeless type guy with his hair all scroungy. And he's missing his teeth. I said, are you? He says, I am he, Captain Crunch. Well, he came inside and started showing us boxes and techniques and codes to type out to get to other countries and go by satellite, trick operators and payphones. And we went out that night to Kip's Pizza Parlor and talked till late, maybe 2 o'clock, 1 or 2 o'clock about all these different codes of the world and things he's done and ways to tap the FBI. And it was really an amazing meeting that Steve and I had to leave to drive back an hour's drive to Steve's house, pick up my car to drive back to Berkeley for school. So we hit it off in Steve's car. His generator broke down. The car was disabled by Fremont in the dark, you know, middle of the night. We walked to a payphone. Let's call Captain Crunch. He's going to drive back this way. He can give us a ride. So should we try the blue box on an operator or use money? Well, let's try the blue box. He just taught us how to do it. And Steve dialed with the blue box, and the operator came back on the line. And he hung up real quick. The operator came on the line. Try it again. You got to tell it's a data call. And he tries it again. The operator comes on the line. He's all scared, so we put in money. Cop car pulls up. The cop comes walking past me and Steve. I had long hair at the time. He probably thought we had some drugs. And he starts using his flashlight in the bushes with his back turned to me. And Steve managed, with a shaking hand, managed to pass the blue box to me, and I got it in my coat pocket. I had a coat. The cop searched me down and found the blue box with all of its little push buttons. It looked like a touch-tone phone. You push it, they make tones. It's like a lot worse music than a touch-tone phone, but it's tones. And he said, what is it? I said, it's an electronic music synthesizer. I said, what's the orange button for? Steve said, that's the one that seizes the phone line for your command. Steve said, that's for calibration. And then the second cop came. Took the blue box and he says, what is it? It's an electronic music synthesizer. And this was in the earliest days, the first Moog synthesizers were out. That was the word going around. Then he says, what's the orange button for? And Steve says, calibration again. And then the cop said, what happened? He said, our car broke down. It's out on the freeway. The cop said, well, let's go out there. So we get in the cop car. This cop turns around, hands me back the blue box, and he says, a guy named Moog beat you to it. Moog synthesizer. Managed to get a ride finally from Captain Crunch back down to Steve's house in Los Altos. Got in my car, drove back to Berkeley at 3 in the morning, fell asleep on the freeway. Totaled my car. Walked all the way to my dorm and told my roommate, you have to turn everything into a joke. You know, I said, good thing I didn't pay the $25 parking fee this quarter. As I used my blue box, I had these weird things that came out of this Esquire magazine article that was called Fiction Also, even though it was real. And it was about these hackers were supposed to be just trying to explore the phone system and tell Ma Bell what its flaws were. Help Ma Bell, help them fix their system. And they weren't really out to be greedy and take money and stuff. So I decided that was the sort of phone freak to be. So if I made calls to my relatives, my parents, my friends, I would pay for those calls. If I wanted to explore how can talk to operators of the world and getting calls to strange places like the Pope, I would do that for fun with the blue box. And, well, anyway, that year college ended and I decided, I lost my car, I'm going to work for another year to get money for my 4th year of college. About the same time, I decided to start the very first dial-a-joke in the San Francisco Bay Area. You'll run into a lot of people in your life that started companies, but I'm probably the only one you've ever met that started the first dial-a-joke ever in a regional area. I'm very, very proud of that. It was hard to do. You were not allowed to own an answering machine or a telephone back in those days. We had a monopoly, Ma Bell. And you could only rent one hugely expensive machine that theaters could afford, but people couldn't. So that's what I did anyway. I really wanted to do a dial-a-joke. I told Polish jokes on it, which were the popular jokes of the day. They threatened me with a lawsuit once, the Polish, American Congress Incorporated. And I said, what if I change them to Italian jokes? And they said, that's fine. This was before political credit. They just didn't want their own people being demeaned. And it was great because I never thought in my life I'd ever be able to meet a girl or anything, but now I was anonymous with dial-a-joke. And by the way, I forgot to mention the blue boxes were distant devices too, each other world jobs itself. So I'm doing dial-a-joke and I get calls. I take some calls live at night, not the recording machine, and I managed to meet my first wife. So that's a great workout. Got a job, amazingly that year, working at Hewlett-Packard on calculators. The Hewlett-Packard scientific calculator, the HP35, had changed the world forever. Within a short period of time, sliders would be gone, you'd never see them again. And it was a whole new world. It was the most incredible product of its time. And I got to work on designing it. And I got to be an engineer without a college degree, which was really incredible, just because I could design stuff. In our lab, where we designed the computers, we had to do our own computer work to help us with our designs, to help us with simulations, for example. So we had one Hewlett-Packard mini computer in a room, and you'd have to sign up for time on it. And 40 engineers shared this one computer. It was like the old approach to computing. And while I worked at Hewlett-Packard, a lot of people work in electronics and come home and just want to watch TV. They've had a whole day of doing electronics. I came home and I wanted to do other types of electronics. I got side projects going. I got involved in the first VCRs in the world before Betamax. The first VCRs for consumers was an American company called Cartridge. Anyone here ever heard of it? Very, very little knowledge, very little known. They sold them in TVs. But seriously, it was a colored VCR. They went bankrupt. Our Hewlett-Packard engineers would go down to San Jose, place where they make the software, and buy tons of these machines, colored VCRs, for $60, unused. In a day, when a black and white one cost $1,000. So that was an amazing deal. I got involved in some of the first hotel movie projects, doing the digital design, just all over the place. People heard about me and wanted me to do their designs. And Steve Jobs got a job at Atari, cleaning up some of their games before going into final production. And I had seen a Pong game in a bowling alley. And I looked at it and stared, and I said, I know how TV signals work, and I know digital logic. I could design that. So I designed my own Pong game. And then I got a couple of these little chips that we put our programs on for our calculators at Hewlett Packard called Prawns. They were 4 bits by 256. So it took 2 of them to make 256 bytes. And I programmed them up so that whenever you missed the ball, it would put a little 4-letter word in the corner. It didn't work like darn. Heck. And at some later point, Steve came to me and said, Noel Bushnell wants to do this game, a single-player Pong. It's called Breakout with bricks. And so I got to go in and design a game for Atari, and that was so cool. 4 days and nights. Back in those days, I mean, it wasn't software for a game. It would take normally 6 months to design a game, and 4 days and nights was unheard of. But I didn't go to sleep those nights. Steve and I both got mononucleosis doing it. While I was down there, I went out on the factory floor, and they had this one huge driving game that was going to use a microprocessor. I don't know if the microprocessor was going to do the logic of the game or just watch the buttons that people push. And they had other games that had cellophane over to make parts of the games look colored. And it suggested the idea of coloring games for the first time. And even the Breakout that I did, they put these little cellophane things on and sort of made it look like color, but it was artificial. It wasn't really in the TV set. And while I was sitting there, one of those nights, all night long, Steve would be breadboarding my designs. I was just sort of, this idea popped in my head. Who knows where it came from? What if you spun a little shift register around, and at the right speed, what came out were some signals that I could see in my head were very much like colored TV signals. Not exactly. They didn't follow all the incredibly complicated analog engineering of color television, but they looked kind of like the same. They might show up on a TV set as color, or they might not look at all. Don't know. But it was a little idea that I filed away that night. And I got to go out and play Grand Track 10, the first driving game on the Atari factory floor. I played that thing so much while Steve was breadboarding stuff. I got so good at it. And later year in my town of Scotts Valley, they had a pizza party. And if you got under 40 points on this game, you'd win a pizza. So I could always get 36. So after I won 2-3 pizzas, I took it out. One little fun thing. So Steve and I both got mononucleosis doing that project. And then, in a short time after that, I went over to a basement to visit Captain Crunch. I always liked to pick up on him every once in a while. He would tell me tricks about dialing numbers into certain payphones in certain cities and clicking the hook switch at just the right time to cause some strange things to happen and operators to come on and complete your calls for free. So I like to keep up with what's interesting, even if you don't want the guy as a close friend. because he's going to get caught and he's doing a little bit too much that he shouldn't be doing, or any of that stuff. Or he's just weird. So he was down in the basement in Cupertino where he was doing a job for an engineer, and he had a teletype going. And he said, Steve, I'm playing chess with a computer in Boston. Just playing chess with an MIT computer. And he says, look at this. And he brings up, he toggles in, it was all text, and it was on a teletype, and it would let him switch to a computer in Santa Barbara, or Berkeley, or Stanford. And there were about a dozen computers he could choose from. Oh my God. It's like sometimes you see something in your life, and you just know you have to have it. Like years and years ago, I first heard of somebody sitting down on a park bench with a laptop computer and using a cell phone to get on the internet with no wires, Bluetooth. And it's just like you hear about something, that's the sort of thing, gotta do this. So I sat down and I said, I have to design something that'll be a terminal to get me onto this ARPANET, is what it was called. And you dial a number over at Palo Alto at Stanford, and you're on the ARPANET, and you're talking to computers all over the world. It's that distant reach again that keeps coming up. So I sat down and I designed a video terminal. I had no money, and a lot of the best decisions I ever made in designs came from not having money and also from being really trying to do things with very few parts. So what I did was I said the TV set is the only free output. That's what I use for Pong. Everybody has a TV set and it's free. TVs did not have video in those days, but they came with schematics. You'd open up the schematic, you could probe it with your oscilloscope, take off the back of the TV, probe around and find out where to put a video signal in yourself. That's how we did it. But you needed something to type to other computers. You needed a real human keyboard. That was a stumbling block because keyboards were $200, and this is 1975-ish, 4-ish. So that was a lot of money. And I found one for $60 in the electronics magazine. It was kind of lowercase, but it was a keyboard. And I ordered it, And that was probably the most expensive thing I ever built on the way to the Apple computers. Well, I built this terminal that you could type characters, and they would send it out in a modem. I built a modem. I didn't design the modem, but I just built one from a schematic. And it would send it out over the phone line, and what came back from the other computers would go into this little terminal that knew how to put dots on a TV set that would spell out words. And great, it worked. So I had my own terminal. Jobs came along and he said, let's sell it. So whenever I had some neat designs, he'd always say, let's sell it. And we actually did sell some to a local time-sharing company. And that was a great project. About that time, a friend of mine came and said, there's a computer club started. He didn't say computer club. If he had said that, I might have been too shy. And if he had said microprocessors, I would have skipped it. Because in my 3 years at Hewlett-Packard, I had gotten away from computers. I'd gotten away from microprocessors. I had watched them come and evolve through the first couple of stages. Didn't really know about it. I didn't know that there was a computer called the Altair that was on the front page of a magazine. I hadn't heard anything about that. But my friend Alan Baum said it's a club for people who have video terminals and things. And I had just built a video terminal. And I was very proud of my designs because in those days I was so shy. The way I would talk to people is to design something good and they'll want to talk about it. I didn't really know how to start conversations too easily otherwise. So I went to this club the first night and I was very inside. I was kind of burning a little because all I had to say was I have a video terminal that I designed and it works with your TV set. And everybody else was talking about this Altair computer. They had driven out and visited the factory. They talked about what processor it used, what speeds, the other choices. They had one sitting there in the garage, Gordon French's garage, and the garage door was open. It was night. It was sprinkling a little outside. And what a memorable occasion. They passed out the data sheet to a microprocessor, Intel 8008, but it was from a Canadian company version. And I took that data sheet home. That night, before going to bed, I studied the data sheet and I discovered these little microprocessors are basically the same thing as the early 8-bit mini computers were. They're basically the same thing, but they're on a chip. And what popped into my head is, now I can buy the computer that I've wanted my whole life to run Fortran on. I will be able to buy it because it's just a chip. And I searched for a processor to start building this project with. And the 8080 from Intel was going to be $400, and there was no way to buy it, and that was too much. And I found out as a Hewlett-Packard employee, I could get a Motorola microprocessor called the 6800 for $40. And so I designed my computer. I went in at night to my cubicle at Hewlett-Packard, pulled out my drafting table, and I started drafting the design of a computer, which was going to be basically a 6800 microprocessor, some RAM, static RAM, you just wire the address and data bits to it, and my video terminal for a keyboard and an output to a TV set. And that's how I would build this computer. And what popped into my head was, sure, I could build the old airplane cockpit style computer with lights and lights and lights and switches like the Altair. But every one of those switches is a part that costs money. And every one of those switches needs a couple of wires going somewhere. And all those wires have to go into chips, so you have to have a whole bunch of chips to somehow get those wires into the processor or to the memory of the computer or something. And it's a messy, messy, messy job. And it even involves hardware like metal pieces. That wasn't me. So I said, why don't I do what we do with calculators? You turn on a Hewlett-Packard calculator, and there's a little human keyboard with numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you just punch a button, and it does whatever that button needs to do. And the calculator's just sitting there waiting for you to push a button. So I said things to my wife now. I just, when I meet somebody who's saying radio out there, I just admire it and wish it were me. It's envious. As far as the name Apple, I was picking Steve Jobs up at the airport, and we were driving home on the freeway, and he said, I got a name for a company. We threw out a couple of technical names. He said, I got a great Apple computer. And my first response in the car was, there's an Apple Records. And he said, oh, that doesn't matter. So it was kind of funny with Apple Records how they kept playing our little 1 bit out to a speaker, somehow equated it to being a musical device. You know, just because in a logo language we had commands that could say play A sharp. It was pretty hokey to call it a music device. But lawsuits go. Okay, and if that's all, here's a question.
Talk anything at all about what you're doing now?
What I'm doing now, yes, I'm working on. I don't really want to have full-time jobs. I did a lot of teaching. Teaching was the best thing I did. I taught a last class on Sunday, and I started a company on Monday. We'll start. I was really interested in GPS chips being so low cost. You could finally build some personal trackers for children, for pets, for assets. And it's been a real tough job to get all the things to align that you need for consumer products, which are very low price, which we can hit, but you need very low power so the battery never has to be changed and replaced. Hewlett-Packard, in one generation of calculators, marketing came up with a number that if it's 14 months, it seems like forever to keep. So 14 months is a good goal on a small-sized battery. And some of the performance issues of GPS, and it's been a real struggle, program software-wise and everything. So we're still developing technologies for other people to sell. And I do that, but more of my time winds up just going into the heavy email load. You know, when you're known and people are always contacting you with email. I'm on Apple Computer technology email lists also, where we help each other out with questions and keep up to date with what's going on in the Mac world. It's a large part of my life. And for fun, I just get to concerts. I love riding segways. That's the greatest thing. Everywhere I go, I have segways in my car. So, yeah. That's like, of course at home, I'm pretty much, I like something light in front of you. So I like PowerBooks, something I can take into my bed, into the table, into the hotel, and the same one machine. I have one machine a lot of time. Used to have like 30 computers in the house. Got rid of that. In my classes, I taught a lot of the early stuff when it was just barely possible. Digital photography was a big part of my class every year. Online, back when AOL was Macintosh only, even long, long ago. We did video editing in the classes when the equipment to do it cost more than the computer. So, and that was just, a lot of fun, but I don't really spend my life doing that because it'd be too hard to do any long project the way my email life goes. I hate the people that can tell me these things sometimes. You know what I mean? There's another one.
First of all, Steve, I want to thank you. Without you, I think a lot of us probably wouldn't get more. Thank you. Is there any new technologies that really kind of pique your interest right now? Anything that you're looking
New
at?
technologies that pique my interest. I know right now I look to where I have my own personal problems, and for a long time, RAM was going up, speed was going up, and hard disk was going up. But the hard disk is bugging me right now because I want to store more movies and audio clips and videos. Even the ones people send me as jokes, I don't have enough room. I have to keep offloading them onto DVDs. And I'd love to have something better in that way. Upcoming technologies in computers, very hard to pin down. We still got the problem of, especially, the speeds of processors and the number of transistors on them being so hot in temperature. I don't know where the solution's coming for that. I do like to see a lot of the convergence of wireless technologies. The Macintosh PowerBooks come with Bluetooth and Wi-Fi built in. Well, I want to see real soon, cell phone too. Because I'm always carrying a cell phone card to be online wherever I am. So, it's hard to say. There's a lot of people in the world that are still stuck and can't even get broadband to their homes. So, where the problems are, some inventor's got to go looking for solutions. Really new drastic technologies, I don't know. Maybe it'll come from genomics. They talk about DNA actually building silicon chips someday, or nano technology building silicon in the future to get denser if we can solve those problems. Sure. All right. Well, I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Steve, for your vision. Yeah, Steve's actually going to be doing an interview now with Alex Williams with Decision Cast. And of course, he's probably going to be around, so don't worry. He's not going to disappear. We're not holding him up in the room or anything. And nice, Robert. Where'd you go? You're sitting right up here.